Ja, en dan stappen we over op het Engels.
Ja, zometeen. Hè. We hebben nu een onderdeel met 2 Engelse sprekers. Dat is het laatste deel van ons congres. Ik zeg welcome to the final part of the Skepsiscongres 2020. My name is Gert-Jan van het Land.
And my name is still Herman Drecht. We're spot on.
Yes.
Time-wise.
At the moment, yes.
Yes. Okay. So
and we got it right at the 5 hours difference, time difference with the United States.
We do.
This is the only weekend we have in the year, I think, that we have a 5 hours time difference with the East Coast.
Yeah. So that it is doable.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. So this late afternoon session, we have 2 speakers that are already known to many members of the public. But these 2 speakers discussed skepticism at the Skepsiscongres 2016 with the audience, of course, but also with each other. And we're going to introduce them again briefly. And after that, I'll give a short recap. Hopefully, I'll manage a short recap of their Congress contributions of that year 2016. And by the way, of course, you can always look at the recordings of those contributions of Maarten, Boudry and Massimo Pigliucci from 2016 on the Skepsis website. So Maarten has disappeared, so I'll start with Massimo.
Let's start with Massimo, yeah.
Hi, Massimo. Yeah.
Hi there.
He is the KD Irani Professor of Philosophy at the City College of New York. His academic work is in evolutionary biology, philosophy of science, the nature of pseudoscience, and the practical philosophy of Stoicism. His books include How to be a Stoic, Using Ancient Philosophy to Live a Modern Life, basic books, and Nonsense on Stilts, Onzin op stelten in Dutch, How to Tell Science from Bunk, which is published by the University of Chicago Press. His most recent book is A Field Guide to a Happy Life, 53 Brief Lessons for Living, also appeared with basic books. And of course, you can find more on Massimo Pigliucci at his website, massimopigliucci.com. And it's now time to introduce Maarten, who has joined our broadcast. Maarten Boudry is a philosopher of science and current holder of the Etienne Vermeer's Chair of Critical Thinking at Ghent University. His most recent book is Science Unlimited on the Challenges of Scientism, co-edited with Massimo Pigliucci. He published more than 40 papers in academic journals, several popular books in Dutch on critical thinking, illusions, and moral progress. Right, so we have 2 quite impressive speakers.
Yes, so a warm welcome to the both of you. Thank you, Gert-Jan, for the introductions. So what I try to do is to review your contributions from 2016 and see whether I can briefly summarize them. So I start with Massimo's contribution. So that's about 4 years ago, right? So Massimo, in that talk, you pointed out that a skeptic is only a skeptic if he or she carries the right epistemic virtues. So the notion of epistemic virtue is very important there. In brief, a skeptic ought to take the other-minded person seriously, must always show the right attitude for looking and seeking the truth and do the research, and the skeptic can therefore never be complacent, right? And can never fall back on the argument from authority, like, such and such says so that's why it is the way it is. And a skeptic can never fall back on that argument from authority. It's very brief, but Maarten, so you added 4 years ago to this statement by Massimo that skeptics should not accept the common reproach that they take away the possible benefits from holding false beliefs. And you presented your dogastic catch-22 argument to show that it is impossible to reap the benefits of an illusion, because the moment you know the benefits of an illusion, you realize it is in fact an illusion, and so you cannot enjoy its benefits as an illusion or from the illusion any longer. So that takes one to the conclusion that skeptics must always fight rational and false beliefs, since these beliefs are simply inherently risky. So 4 years back, we have learned that skepticism is about epistemic virtue, an epistemic virtuous stance, and that we need not be concerned with spoiling people's happy lives in bringing them closer to the truth. What we did not discuss 4 years ago, I think, is how we bring people with, the most wild, speculative beliefs closer to the truth. And this seems to be one of the more pressing points right now in times of climate change and a corona pandemic. So maybe, Massimo, maybe I can give you the floor for 10 minutes. The question to you was to give an update of your Congress contribution of 2016. And we're all very eager to hear it, of course. And after that, I will ask Maarten for an update in 10 minutes. And after that, you'll get 20 minutes to exchange ideas with each other. And maybe we have time for some audience questions as well.
So you can always use the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. And behind the screens, there is a team of volunteers working on your questions and leading them through to Herman and me.
Yes, so keep using the Q&A and the chat function. So Massimo, can I give you the floor?
Sure. Thank you. First of all, thanks for inviting me. This is great. 4 years ago, that seems like a lifetime ago, right?
It does.
Compared to what has happened in the meantime, especially over the last year. I'm going to try actually to be shorter than the time allotted, because I think the most interesting part probably for everybody is going to be the conversation with Maarten rather than much of an update on my part, at least. Because the news is not good in terms of updates. Not much positive has happened in the last 4 years in the areas that we were discussing. There is, in direct response to your question, what do we do in order to bring people to a little bit more reasonable and more fact or evidence-based view of the world? Well, there is a lot of research that keeps coming out. It was already available to some extent 4 years ago, and it has kept coming out in social psychology and related areas that tell us quite a bit about what's going on. But the news is not necessarily that good, because most of this research seems to indicate that it's really difficult to sway the opinions of people who tend not to be evidence-based, especially when those opinions are ingrained because they've been there for a long time. So the locus of action really should be children education, not necessarily adults. And that reminds me that people have actually known this for much longer than modern social scientists. The Jesuits within the Catholic Church has this saying, give me a child of 7 and I will give you a man of 14, right? So they knew that the moment to brainwash people is actually the onset of the so-called age of reason, right? Between 7 and 8 and 9 years old. We tend to be late as skeptics. I mean, one of the things that keeps being surprising to me is that we try to talk to an audience other than talking to ourselves, which is fine. We can talk among ourselves. But when we address people with unfounded beliefs, we tend to talk to an adult audience, and we pay comparatively little attention to children, where in fact that is really the battle for the next generation. You could argue that the current generation is already lost, or at least largely lost. So that's not good news. On the other hand, there are some good news. For instance, 4 years ago, when we were having this discussion, one of the major authors in the area of belief and rationalization versus rationality kind of thing was Jonathan Haidt from New York University. And Haidt has a very, very negative view of human rationality. His research seems to indicate that people don't really reason about things, they rationalize. And that includes skeptics, by the way, because of course we're people. So we're included into the general population. And I've always been, if you allow me, somewhat skeptical of Haidt's research for a number of reasons that go from methodological issues to sampling issues of his data, and to what I always thought were a bit too grand conclusions based on the evidence that he had. I mean, there is no question that human beings engage in rationalization. We've known that for a long time. And there is no question that everybody does it to some extent, even people who are trained in critical thinking and so on and so forth. But if you actually listen to Haidt, it seems like it's almost impossible, and we should just give up about convincing people because we just rationalize and confabulate all the time. The good news is, over the last 2 or 3 years, there have been a series of papers that have actually put a significant dent into Haidt's research and similar research that has come out in previous years. Turns out, actually, people are capable of rationality, and people who do change their mind. So yes, yay to go, right? However, once again, this research actually tends to indicate that a lot of that happens in children, that children are surprisingly capable of evidence-based rational thinking, and then it's their education or lack thereof, I suppose, that kind of twists them and warps them into adults that lose that capacity. So there is some good news over the last 4 years, despite the fact that we live in a situation, in a climate where people are denying basic facts about reality, as we all know, and making life miserable for the entire planet as a result. The only other thing that I would add is that despite what I just said about adults being more difficult in terms of changing their mind, etc., it is certainly possible. And again, there is research that shows that it is possible. People do change their mind about things. However, typically that happens as in two broadly defined sort of categories or ways. One is as a result of a sudden, unexpected, usually tragic or otherwise shocking event, right? So people's worldview gets kind of shaken all of a sudden if something major happens. A pandemic would qualify as something major, especially if you happen to be unlucky enough to have lost your job or even worse, to actually having gotten sick. The problem is that often those kinds of shocking events do change people's minds, but they tend to change people's mind in the wrong direction. That is, people tend to embrace more magical thinking when they face desperate times, when they face situations that seem to be outside of their control. The other major mode in which, or modality that allows people to change their mind about things takes much more time. It usually takes, not even months, but years. It takes repeated exposure, and it takes repeated exposure from different sources, and it is particularly effective if these different sources are not antagonistic. So in other words, there is, for instance, a lot of research on religious fundamentalists leaving the church and accepting modern scientific notions such as evolution. And typically, not always, but typically the way this happens is not because Richard Dawkins beat them on the head and says, you're a bunch of idiots if you don't believe me. That never works, or almost never works. What happens is that they encounter friends or people that they trust that share the majority of their worldview already, but these people somehow differ in opinions to some extent, to an extent that we may think from the outside it's kind of minor, but those minor differences put the first crack, the wedge into people's beliefs. And then people start saying, wait a minute, if that person that I trust believes something differently from me, then maybe I should take a look into it. And once they start taking a look on their own, they, self-propelled curiosity, then that actually may result in fairly major changes down the road. But unfortunately, as I just described, that's a very long process. It takes a lot of energy, and it takes repeated exposure from different sources. That is, you almost never hear anybody, including skeptics, by the way, who have a conversation, and then the conversation that, you know what, you're right, I'm completely going to change my worldview. You're absolutely right. That never happens, right? I think back of the situations in my life when I have changed my mind about major or even minor things. And typically it's not at the end of the discussion, but it is much later on when I keep thinking and my mind keeps going back to these things, and I say, well, you know what, let me read something about this, or let me talk about with somebody else about this. And then eventually down the road, the switch kind of happens. But the good news is that once the switch happens that way, slowly, and by repeated exposures to different sources, it really becomes fairly stable. People don't flip back and forth very easily. So that's pretty much my update.
Okay. Can I just one quick point to add before I forget? One place where it does happen, Massimo. By the way, hi, nice to meet you. Well,
hello.
good to see you again. I already said hi in the chat box. But one place where it does happen, where people change their mind all of a sudden, is in Plato's dialogues. Where
they are fictional, right?
Right, they are fictional. And but the funny thing about it is that, like, after being barraged with all sorts of questions from Socrates, most of the time, like, the other guy just says, "Oh yes, you're completely right, Socrates. You exposed a weakness or a contradiction in my thinking," and it has a kind of funny effect on the reader, exactly because it is so rare. This is never how actual discussions go. And it's actually, I'm not sure if the humoristic effect was intended by Plato, but it's kind of funny to read it that way. Yeah, exactly because it's so exceptional. Anyway,
I don't think it was intended, Maarten.
Right. Perhaps it happened back in those good old days. I'm not sure, but I would doubt it. Even with someone like Socrates, to humbly accept your defeat.
Yeah. So Massimo, thanks for your contribution. And first, in a first round of this afternoon, where we discuss things about skepticism itself. So Maarten, maybe you can take the floor now for, I don't know, 10 minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually,
and did you prepare some slides, Maarten?
Yes, I have a short presentation. I'm not going to share it now. Do you see it?
Good. Please do.
All right. So I was asked to give an update of what I talked about 4 years ago, which is like a different era, as Massimo said. So I actually had to delve down into my memory to remember what exactly I was talking about back then. This was even before the election of Trump, I guess. So talking about a completely different era. The title of my talk back then, I think, was "What if false beliefs make us happy?" I just tweaked the title a little bit now. What if false beliefs are useful? Skeptic's Dilemma. Yes. Well, the key question I was dealing with 4 years ago is the truth sometimes harmful? Like in many circumstances, we would say that it's good to have true beliefs, but are there any exceptions? Like in this cartoon, what I'm about to tell you is going to change your life forever. Are you really sure you want to know it? Sometimes the truth can be so depressing or inconvenient or disconcerting that perhaps you're better off believing in falsehoods. False beliefs can make you happy, but perhaps they can also be useful for society at large. This is something that I didn't directly deal with 4 years ago, but I'm going to try to address that question here quickly and apply it to some things that happened in the span of the last couple of months. So the skeptic's dilemma is what I call, well, on the one hand, we want to expose false beliefs and illusions and deceptions. On the other hand, of course, we don't want to make people miserable. So if people have these illusions that make them happy, so who are we to take them away from them? So I think it's an interesting question to pose as a skeptic. Now, one argument on our side, of course, is that false beliefs can be dangerous, mainly because beliefs are levers for action. So people act in accordance with their beliefs, and that can be really dangerous, can even be deadly. People who put all their faith in miracles, for example, and so, for example, when they're sick and they don't go to a regular doctor, but they just put all their faith in God, well, that might actually cost your life or the life of your children. Overconfidence and War is another famous example. It's a book by Dominic Johnson about how many wars in history were actually started because of overconfident leaders and generals, people who really believed that they were the stronger party and that the enemy was just weak and it would be would be an easy victory. The First World War is an excellent example of that. So these false beliefs were extremely dangerous. I mean, they literally led to millions of deaths. So false beliefs collide with reality, inevitably even. I mean, sooner or later, reality is going to catch up with you. As Philip K. Dick, the science fiction writer, once said, this is one of my favorite quotes about illusions. Reality is that which, when you stop believing it, doesn't go away. So yes, of course, perhaps illusions can make you happy in the short run, but sooner or later you're going to have to deal with reality, because reality is not going to go away. You can call that the revenge of reality. Well, one of the prime examples of that is, of course, what happened during the last year, this terrible year, when a pandemic was wreaking havoc all across the globe. There are many examples of how false beliefs led to harm, but I mean, the most extreme example is, of course, Donald Trump, and how he downplayed, ignored, denied, deflected the virus from the very start. We have it totally under control. It will go away. It's going away. One day it will disappear like a miracle. Probably these beliefs made him happy. I mean, it made him feel in control, because he was the most powerful man in the world, and it would only, it was a Chinese phenomenon, so they had nothing to worry about. But of course, reality did catch up with him, and now the death toll in the US is over 200,000. Many of those deaths, I think, were avoidable if only they had a competent president who acted when he still had the chance to do so. But slightly different question that I think is more interesting. A belief can be harmful for the owner of the belief.
En nu is Maarten bevroren.
Yeah, Maarten is frozen.
What about deceiving others? So what about paternalistic?
Maarten, you were just frozen for I think 10 seconds or so. So maybe
10
you
seconds.
can. Yeah.
What was the last thing I said? So if you jump out of a window because you believe you can fly, obviously this is going to be harmful to you, but it's not going to hurt anyone else. But what about deceiving others? What about instilling false beliefs in others? There's this thing that philosophers call paternalistic deception, where you deceive someone else in their own best interests. White lie is the term that is often used. The distinction with having deceiving yourself is that at least someone can keep an eye on reality. So you have the deceiver and the deceived, and the deceiver can make sure that, for example, you won't jump out of the window. It could make you happy to believe that you can fly, but someone's going to make sure that no accidents happen. You may have heard of the medicine called Obekalp. Obekalp is a pill that was invented by Dr. Kupperman, I think was his name, a couple of years ago. It was a medicine for treating menstrual pains, but amazingly, Dr. Kupperman discovered that it was a panacea for all sorts of other conditions that he didn't think of at first. Of course, Obekalp is just placebo spelled backwards. The pill didn't contain anything. It was just sugar, I guess, like homeopathy. And it really made patients feel better. And Dr. Kupperman, of course, was well aware that it was a placebo. So he would also make sure that the patients didn't put themselves in dangerous situations. So in that sense, he was keeping an eye on reality. And you could say, well, shouldn't we do more of that? Yes, but there is one important side effect of these types of medicine, is that it erodes trust in doctors. The medicine itself is not going to harm you. It may even make you feel better. And because of the placebo effect, it may really have a biological or physical effect on your body. But it erodes trust in doctors. And I think something similar has also happened during this pandemic. So you have the people like Trump who were, to my understanding, who were deluded. So who really thought that the virus was not dangerous at all, and that it would disappear out of its own accord. But then you have the doctors, I think, who were telling some white lies about face masks. I say face mask is the best example. This happened in Belgium, but also in the Netherlands and in the US, where not just political leaders, but also doctors were saying things like, well, face masks are useless for the public. They don't really work. It gives us a false sense of security. Why were they saying that? Well, as it transpired after a couple of weeks or months, the real reason why they said that there was a shortage of masks for health workers, and because they were afraid that everyone would flock to the pharmacist and start stockpiling masks, they Well, they told these little white lies about masks because they wanted to avoid that. Of course, it happened. It worked in the short run, in the sense that it allowed them to have enough masks available for the health workers. But in the long run, you had the same effect as with the over-the-counter medicine. It eroded trust in the experts. Inevitably, you do get a revenge of reality. The truth does come to light, and as experts have to backtrack, they have to admit at some point, yeah, well, they may actually be useful, and now everyone is wearing them in the street. I mean, the Netherlands is still catching up with us, but this is something that we came around to accepting face masks, and I think they actually do work as well. But that is an empirical question, of course. And the problem here is, next time around, who will trust the experts? Now, for example, slides are not in order. We have a whole discussion about schools. Now the experts are telling us on television, don't worry about the schools because the kids are not really the drivers of the epidemic, and they don't really get sick. They don't produce a lot of fires, blah, blah. And perhaps they're right. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not an expert. I haven't read the publications. But of course, I have this nagging doubt because I keep thinking about the face mask. Do they genuinely believe that the kids are not the drivers of the epidemic? Or do they just tell that because they want to achieve a certain effect, because they want to reassure people, and because they want to make sure that the kids can still go to school? There is actually a hypothesis that even Trump in January and February was fully aware of the danger of the pandemic, but that he was just telling white lies deliberately to reassure the American public. I'm not really sure that I'm buying into that. I think he was genuinely deluded. But anyway, this is just a possibility. One thing that I wanted to mention is that there are all sorts of conspiracy theories about the coronavirus, that Bill Gates is behind it, that it's all about 5G radiation, that the vaccine already exists but is being withheld from the public. To my surprise, some of my academic colleagues seem to think that believing in these types of conspiracy theories can be useful, can be beneficial to people, because at least it gives them a sense of control in times of crisis and uncertainty. I'm not really sure if it gives you a sense of control to believe that someone really deliberately intended this pandemic. Also, I mean, for the people who believe that this is just like the flu, and there is actually there's this wonder medicine, hydroxychloroquine. This is something that Trump believes. I mean, if you really believe that kind of stuff, you're also going to put yourself in danger. So also, even in these types of situations, I don't think that false beliefs are actually beneficial. So yes, I stick to my guns. The truth is always better. I don't think that experts should be patronizing, rather than just distorting or bending the truth a little bit. I think they should have just explained to the public, look, masks can be helpful. They're not perfect, of course. They're not foolproof. But now we don't have a lot of them, and they're much more important for health workers. And so please don't go to the pharmacists. Please don't stock them. I think you should put some trust in the public as well. I think people could have dealt responsibly with that type of information. The trouble is that now in the long run, doctors have eroded the trust that the public has put into them. As you see, I've talked about a slightly different question than what Massimo was talking about. So because I thought I had to give an update of what I talked about 4 years ago. As it happens, I agreed with pretty much everything that Massimo just said in his own presentation or in his own update. But it's up to the moderator what we can talk about now for the discussion. So I'm going to end the presentation here. There were no more glitches with the audio.
No.
Okay.
Apart from that one freeze, everything
Right.
worked. Can I just ask Massimo? So Maarten, I think that it's quite clear that your kind of motto or slogan is "truth is always better." That's rather unconditional and rather categorical. Maybe Massimo, you want to react to that?
No, I actually agree with Maarten.
You agree with Maarten?
Yeah. So for two reasons. One is the one that Maarten laid out so nicely, and I agree that that the Philip K. Dick quote is wonderful. I've used it repeatedly in social media over the last several months. yes, you can fool yourself for some time, you can avoid reality for some time, but eventually it will catch up with you and bite you in the ass if you don't act accordingly. So it is certainly the case, I think, that people who embrace conspiracy theories or embrace, non-evidence-based notions may feel better for a while about things. They may feel a sense of explanation and a sense of control. If not control, at least a sense of, I know how things are happening, why things are happening, which is at kind of a second grade level of control, right? We have a narrative. We are storytelling animals. We thrive on narratives, and we need narratives for things. So that certainly can be helpful from a psychological perspective. But if we're talking about, health in this particular case, I'm sorry, the psychology is going to do only so much, and at some point things are going to happen, as we have seen, unfortunately, over the last several months. The other reason I think I agree with Maarten is more prescriptive, I guess, than sort of, based on evidence, and that is, I just, as a philosopher, I suppose I buy into the Socratic approach that truth is an ethical duty. The quest for truth is an ethical duty for human beings, whether it is pleasant or not. Maarten himself, I think, I actually did take a look at his original presentation, and Maarten himself did agree that there are extreme cases or unusual cases where it might be okay to lie to people, right? I mean, like when my grandmother was about to die, I wasn't giving her the atheist sermon and say, you're going to disappear in a few days and nothing is going to be left, because she was a believer. Fine, whatever. But I did have that talk, on the other hand, with my nephews and nieces, because they are young and they are going through, they have their whole life ahead of them, hopefully. So there are cases where it's okay, I think, to allow certain people to ignore reality, but as a general idea, I think it's not a good one.
But I can. So let me play Maarten here just for a while, and so now you could say, well, but if you tell your dying grandmother not the truth, very briefly, very bluntly put, not the truth, but your nephews or your children, you do tell them the truth. But isn't that corrosive for your own authority as a source of a truth teller?
Yes, it would be. That's why I made sure that I was talking to my grandmother when nobody else was around. Right? If on the other hand, the argument comes, I mean, it has happened that that particular topic, let's say, came up with somebody who was elderly and a believer, etc., and there were other people who I thought would actually benefit from a more evidence-based reality. In that case, I simply avoid the conversation. I just don't get into it. I try to shift the conversation somewhere else, or I don't say anything. And then maybe later on, I can talk to some people aside, to other people aside, and say, that grandma believes that, but really. So I think, we need to be compassionate. I mean, just because we're skeptics, that doesn't mean we shouldn't care about people's feelings and, in psychology.
Well, but if that is the stance you take, then I would say that, Maarten, you are perhaps a bit too strict, saying that truth is always better. Maybe you let me try this. Maybe you mean in the end, truth is always better.
Yes, in the long run, and this is of course what deathbed scenarios make so special, is that there is no long run. It's the last day you're going to be alive, so it won't hurt you, and if you have those last moments of comforting illusion, then perhaps it's worth it. But even in that scenario, I think if I recall, 4 years ago, I allowed for the possibility that not that I would lie to my grandmother, but that I would refrain from giving the atheistic sermon, as Massimo pointed out. If she would have asked me point blank, do you think I'm going to heaven? I wouldn't have lied. Perhaps I would have given an evasive answer or something. But even in those extreme situations, I mean, by the way, I think even realistically speaking, I had a grandmother, of course, who was a religious believer. I didn't visit her on her deathbed, but she was well aware that I was an atheist. So people who, I mean, you've had this conversation beforehand, of course, and I think believers, they're not going to put you on the spot and ask you point blank, like, so do you believe that I'm going to heaven? Because she already knows the answer. So she's just going to evade the discussion. But if she really wants an honest answer from me, then I think even then, I mean, so like sometimes people invite you to lie. So like sometimes they, like a colleague might send you a paper and ask like a leading question, like, so, you know, do you appreciate my work? I really feel insecure about that. I hope you like it. That's almost like nudging you in the direction of, please lie to me. And then perhaps I would do it, because then it's almost like implicitly someone is asking for it. But if someone asks me for my honest opinion, and I really think the paper is scrappy, then I will say it. I hope. Well, this is a much less extreme case than the deathbed scenario, of course. But perhaps you're right. I don't want to be too strict or fundamentalist about it. I think it's always a question of, it's on balance. I think that truth is always better, and it's in the long run. Because it's very hard to predict all the possible adverse consequences that false beliefs might have. And again, what makes the deathbed scenarios special is that there is no long run. It's only going to be those last few fleeting moments, and then it's going to be over anyhow. So what's the point of having a discussion about the existence of an afterlife?
So, but let me give you an example, for instance, where I would not, and in fact I have not, because I've been in that situation a couple of times, lie to people, even though plenty of other people around me said that that was the compassionate thing to do. And this is somebody who's been, I had somebody in the family who had been diagnosed with, you know, a terminal illness. And the typical attitude among Italian doctors and you know, the culture at large is, well, you don't tell them. You just tell them, you know, something's, you know, that we're working on it. There's a possible cure. There's et cetera, et cetera. But I don't think that's the right thing to do in terms of, and that's an ethical issue. It's not really necessarily a matter of consequence. The consequence is this person is going to die pretty soon, no matter what I say or not say. However, if I were in the position of that person, I would want to know, not as I want to know the truth for truth's sake, but I want to know because I want to prepare myself for that situation, for the ultimate test of character, as the ancient Greeks and Romans called it, in my own way, right? And so that is a situation where I wouldn't feel comfortable lying. I mean, of course, you still need to, you know, the answer to these kinds of questions is always, it depends. We need specifics, depends on who the person is, what the situation exactly is, et cetera, et cetera. But other things being equal, I wouldn't. Because I think the person has the right to spend the last few months or year or whatever it is of their lives in whatever way they feel more appropriate, or to prepare accordingly, as opposed to just being lied continuously for months at a time by both doctors and family.
Yeah. I do give an example in my book, my Dutch book, about willful ignorance. And again, willful ignorance is slightly different from having a full-blown illusion. So there's this research that shows that you know, people who have a family member with Huntington's disease, and so who are also in a risk group, there's a genetic test that you can do to find out if you have Huntington's disease. And some people just don't want to hear the test results. So I think if you're a doctor, and if someone asks you for the truth, and of course, obviously, it's your ethical duty, you have to give it. But if someone says, I don't want to know it, so even if you do know it, please don't tell me, because this is my choice, then yes, then in that specific case, I think the truth would be worse, because the truth would be something uncalled for, because if the patient wants to make that life choice, not to live truthfully, I mean, I would never do it if I were at risk for Huntington's disease. Again, as Massimo said, I want to. This is the real, like, a test of your what is it, philosophical character?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So it's something I want to deal with. That I want to face my own mortality, and also I want to be reassured if I don't have it. This is something that they don't have in mind. That, I mean, if you do not know the test results, perhaps they are. Perhaps it would be good news, and by just refusing to look at that good news, you're going to have that nagging doubt for the rest of your life that, oh, I might have Huntington's disease. I might develop symptoms in a couple of years from now. But so if I were in that situation, I think I would want to know the truth.
Sure.
But if someone doesn't want to hear it, then sure. But I think I do wonder what.
So I guess, Maarten, that so there is a pragmatic, there is an ethical dimension to the idea that the truth is always better. Sometimes it depends. I'm playing the devil's advocate here.
Yeah. So the way I develop the argument in my book is the truth though is always better. So I'm trying to convince people that if I were in your shoes, I would always go for the truth. But of course, you don't have to. It's not up to you to make that decision on someone else's behalf. So if someone else really wants to be deluded, then sure. I guess it would be fine then.
Yeah, which, by the way, brings us back to, what we're doing against skeptics. Why are we punching, holes into other people's beliefs, et cetera, et cetera. Well, but nobody obliges other people to read skeptics' books or to go to skeptic conferences or, things like that. So this notion that we're ruining for the rest of the world is really a little bit of nonsense. If people, I think that what skeptics have to do, I think, again, in terms of ethical duty, really, is to present a counterpoint to so much nonsense that is available in society at large, and so that if those people who do want to know the evidence, those people who do want to look at the sources, etc., have references, have reference points, and they can actually do it. We don't go door to door and knock on people's doors and say, hey, have you heard the latest truth about UFOs not exist? It's like, no, that it doesn't work that way. But I wanted to bring back something, the conversation to something that Maarten has mentioned in his presentation, and that has actually showed up also in the chat, and that's the issue of trust. Research shows pretty clearly that most people at some level or another, they have to trust some authority, right? We cannot all check stuff for on our own. We don't have the time.
Can I interject a question from one of the members of the audience, which is spot on what you're now saying?
Sure.
I read the question of Hans Vernave. He asks, how can a layperson not be partly believing things based on authority, since she must be relying on expert information which she cannot check by herself? Which is exactly, I think, the point you're trying to make now.
Yes, in fact, I would go even broader. Not just laypersons. Everybody has to trust a lot of people. I'm a professional biologist, so if the question relates to biology, especially evolutionary biology, I can figure it out on my own. But I'm not a physicist, so when I say that I believe quantum mechanics, that's just because I trust my colleagues in the physics department to get it right, and not because I understand quantum mechanics to the level of an expert. So I think that everyone has to trust a lot of sources and a lot of authorities. We just don't have a choice. And this is done also by all sorts of people who claim otherwise, right? That if you spend some time on social media, you will see, you get on a discussion and somebody says, but what about this? And they link, to an article from a peer review article, which they probably haven't read, or a book they also haven't read, and stuff like that. So, well, what about this? What? It's a question of who you trust in terms of authority. Are we actually gonna, the two of us, who are neither one of us is expert on the subject matter, are we really gonna delve into the technical literature, become experts, and then have a conversation? That's just not gonna work. And this, by the way, is a very, very old problem. There is a Platonic dialogue, the Cosmides, where Socrates raises the same issue. He says, how does the wise person know if to distinguish a doctor from a quack? And his answer is, it doesn't. You can't. You have to become a doctor yourself. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to tell the difference. So it really all eventually comes down to trust. I think the issue of trust is also commonsensical, right? When people ask me, why do you trust the scientists, or why do you trust these experts? I say, well, I'm sure that when you have a problem with your teeth, you go to a dentist and not a car mechanic. Why? Because you tend to trust dentists to take care of teeth problems and car mechanics to take care of car problems, right? So we all trust experts, which makes it crucial what Maarten was saying earlier. Once that the experts start lying, and they're found out, as inevitably they are in the long run, they have really done serious damage.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, but but hang on. But so there's another question from the audience that is related to this, because the other way around, of course, is also true, that once you are into the hands of a quack, it's very difficult to escape from the hands of a quack, especially with, and this is a question, I forgot the name. Maybe Gert-Jan, you can look it up, but there's a wonderful documentary now on Netflix called The Social Dilemma. Maybe you've seen it, and it's a documentary that shows you how the algorithms of the social media, of course, are very fine-tuned to suck you into specific bubbles or echo chambers, and they are very effective. So what do we say to people that are kind of already on the other side, and help
On the dark side.
on the on the dark side, so to speak, and who are there with, you know, and they are backed up by lots of what they call experts.
Right. I think one thing that people have to realize, and that they don't realize to a sufficient extent, is that in every scientific field, whether it's biology or geology or virology, you're gonna find rebels, people who almost take a devious pleasure in just going against the grain, and the broader the consensus is in a certain field, the more, you know, courageous they find themselves, because they dare to challenge it. So it's never difficult to find even a medical expert, for example, let alone someone who doesn't have a medical expertise. A medical expert who says that, oh, coronavirus, it's just has the same mortality as the flu. We had someone like that in Belgium, and he was the head of the department at a hospital. You know, he was completely unmoored from reality. But you have these people, you have these professed Galileos who think that they are, you know, the only ones who see through it all, and all the other colleagues are just defenders of a certain orthodoxy. So the way that many people end up in these kind of bubbles, as you call them, and I've seen the documentary as well, is that they start out with a single expert and they say, see, he's a doctor. Think about Didier Raoult, for example, that French expert who was the one who promoted hydroxychloroquine. I mean, the research was complete rubbish, but it's never difficult to find a person like that, or a biologist who says that Darwin was wrong, or a geologist who says that plate tectonics is bullshit. Science is not a matter of trusting a single expert or an individual expert. It's a matter of trusting the social process that produces scientific knowledge. So it's important to realize that what we know about a virus, for example, or what we know about evolution, is the result first of scientists challenging each other ideas and coming up with different sorts of hypotheses, and trying to correct their hypotheses, and eventually, hopefully, arriving at a certain scientific consensus. But what makes science powerful is not the individual intelligence or acuity or or bravery of a single science. Once you don't realize this phenomenon, this phenomenon that in every scientific field you have these kind of rebels, then it's very easy to get sucked into these bubbles, because then you can just pick and choose. You can just cherry pick your own expert and says, well, he's the guy, he's right and all the others are wrong, and that's almost always unlikely. That's
right.
This situation.
That's right. I mean, but there is, again, research and scholarship on this as well. You know, how do you determine whether to trust certain experts rather than others? In Nonsense and Stilts, I actually have an entire chapter there based largely on the scholarship of philosopher Alvin Goodman, who has spent a lot of time talking about thinking about trust. And what he suggests is that, look, there are a number of steps that we, again, commonsensically all tend to follow under different circumstances when we go to a doctor or when we go to a mechanic, et cetera, et cetera. And that is, if we're not experts ourselves, then we look for a number of other criteria. Is this person really an expert? You know, that's why doctors have diplomas in their offices when you walk in, because they want to make sure that you know that they're real doctors and they're not, They didn't just make up this the thing. That's why you get a second opinion, because you're trying to get consensus among when there is something that is really important, that's really something that really at stake. Then you need a second opinion or a third opinion. You try to look for consensus, right? You look into the history of that particular person. Has this person been wrong before? There are things that we can all do. Now, are they, surefire? Are they guarantees of truth? No, of course not. And in fact, even when Maarten says, there are the self-professed Galileos, well, occasionally there is also a real Galileo, right? Occasionally there is the person that really is right, as it turns out, and the rest of us is wrong. Unfortunately, however, there is no way to tell. And statistically speaking, the wannabe Galileos are in fact only wannabes. They're not the real item. And so I think to some extent, this is also about teaching the public about the real nature of science, not the cartoon version of science that unfortunately too often is presented both by scientists and by science popularizers. And the nature of science is it's a provisional, fallible human enterprise. So
okay, but can I just add to that, Massimo, because I think that's a very important point. So explaining science to the audience, and referring back to what you said during the first round of your presentation, namely that we have a good chance of educating kids, and we have a good chance in educating kids what science is really about. And so what I see is there's maybe this is too simplistic, but there seems to be a competition going on between, on the one hand, everything that we share under the social media entertainment industry that sucks in the kids at a very early age and gets them to all kinds of sources at a later age that we don't recognize as the real experts, and a school system that is battling this tendency that children are being taken away or abducted, so to speak, into a different direction. So what do you, maybe this is a question for the both of you, what would you advise policymakers to do to make sure that children get to know science at an early age?
And that they do not follow influencers, for instance, but
exactly
look at the real facts.
Well, it's a tough one. It's a really important point, but it's a tough one. I would say two things. I'm curious to hear what Maarten has to suggest, but I would say two things. At the school level, and therefore at the level of policymakers, we really need to rethink the way we teach our children drastically. Much less emphasis on testing, especially in the United States, much less emphasis on, fact recollection and things like that, and much more emphasis on critical thinking, on process, and so on and so forth. But that means a lot of things. It means retraining teachers, for instance. So you need a whole generation of teachers. You need smaller class sizes so that you can have discussions with the children, even at a young age. All of that requires money, requires political will, and it's not going to happen anytime soon. But I think that would be the way to go. So restructure the entire education system. As far as social media is concerned, there are already, laws and even agreements of service with social media like Facebook, etc., that set a minimum age, but most people ignore it, right? And so the question there is not much what the authorities can do, but what the parents can do. Parents have a responsibility to teach and guide their children, and we increasingly see that most people don't do that for a number of reasons, because they're outsmarted by the kids who know a lot more about apps and smartphones than they do, because they don't have time, because they work sometimes, again, especially in the United States, multiple jobs in order to get to put something to eat on the dinner table, that sort of stuff. But it really is the responsibility, ultimately, is the responsibility of parents. You are the ones who put these children in the world, and you can't just allow them to run wild from a young age and be exposed to whatever it is. That's your duty, your ethical duty as a parent, is to guide them. And part of that guidance is also not allowing them to be exposed to certain things on social media, or at least to limit and then manage their exposure.
Okay. Maarten?
Right. Yeah, I think if there was one thing that I that I think teachers need to instill in children from an early age is the fallibility of human reasoning. Many people think, because they have, that's the way they have been brought up, that you just have to follow your common sense. If you just a bit of logic and you can reason your way out of exactly, that's a very good example.
That's that common sense, Massimo, in Dutch.
Yeah, and it's a kind of a magazine for conspiracy nutcases.
It's from the dark side.
This is what happens when you follow your common sense, because in many cases, in many respects, science is very counterintuitive. So the reason why we need science in the first place is that we can't figure out things all by ourselves. Because our brain is just very vulnerable to all sorts of delusions and plays very strange tricks on us. You can apply that to perception, but also to reasoning. And I think what people need to realize from an early age is to distrust their own brain and to also to distrust the brains of influencers and other people who try to convince them of certain things. The reason why we need science in the first place is that individual brains are fallible and vulnerable to all these delusions and biases and fallacies and deceptions. And science is a social process in which different people correct for each other's biases, what Francis Bacon called the idols of the mind. So the confirmation bias, for example, the fact that we only tend to look for things that confirm what we already believe, and we ignore or we just explain away the things that don't fit our narrative. I think this is there's this famous quote by Richard Feynman: the first principle of science is not to fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. And it also gets back to my other point about you shouldn't trust individual experts, because individual experts are just human beings, and they're as susceptible as any layperson to the foibles and fallacies of human reasoning. What you should trust, to the extent that you should trust science, you should trust science as an institution, or even more as a process for correcting the biases and fallacies of individual human reasoners, and then hopefully ending up with something that is still not absolutely infallible, but at least it's the best thing that we have on offer. So yes, scientific knowledge is going to change. Even with the virus, I think it's a beautiful illustration of how you start out with maximum ignorance, because we didn't know shit about the virus. But first of all, because the virus, like a year ago, the virus didn't even exist, because it was still in a bat somewhere and it hadn't mutated yet to adapt to human beings. And then very slowly, the margin of uncertainty, like the realm of ignorance, is reduced. So we start to learn more and more about the virus, but at first, of course, scientific opinion is going to be all over the map. I mean, some people rightfully hypothesized in January and February, for example, that it was similar to the flu. That was a respectable opinion back then, because there was so much uncertainty. But then, after a couple of months or after a couple of years, not because you have this individual brilliant mind, this genius that figured it all out, no, because you have thousands, literally tens of thousands of scientists working together and all trying to figure out individual pieces of the puzzle, and then hopefully ending up with something that they can all agree on, namely that it's much more dangerous than the flu, for example.
Interesting. Yeah. Can I put in one more question from the audience, Herman?
Yeah, sure.
There are two questions which I think I could combine. Ron Tijhaar and Ronald Portier point to the fact that in this modern age, there's in fact a growing competition from commercial interests with science and logical thinking. They point both of them point, for instance, to the algorithms we have in the social media. They point to the oil industry, which delivers completely untrue statements about the state of the environment, and other large financial interests. Is the playing field changing for the truth?
Yeah, I think it is changing, but this isn't a new phenomenon either. I mean,
Right.
interests have been around for a long, special interests have been around for a long time, from the beginning of humanity, of recorded history, arguably. And people with money and special interest will try to twist the facts and will try to influence other people. What has changed, of course, is that the modern technology makes it so easy and so effective to do, right? Just a few decades ago, the most persuasive kind of technology we had was television. And now, of course, we got the internet, and which was hailed initially as a panacea in terms of, everybody's going to get educated and everybody becomes a critical thinker because everybody has access to the internet. And now we're seeing the consequences of that. But ultimately, I don't want to blame social media per se or internet per se, et cetera, because these are all tools. And they are those tools are effectively neutral. It's up to us what we do with those tools. And unfortunately, human nature being what it is, we end up doing mostly bad stuff with them rather than positive one. But ultimately, it is our responsibility. So yes, the level field, the field is changing for sure, and it's not level. But at the same time, those exact same tools are available to us as well. I mean, look at what we're doing here, right? This Congress would not have been possible in the middle of a pandemic, and now it is because of technology. So we can do the same thing. We know how to use these tools, and it is up to us to do it properly, to raise the money eventually, in fact, in some sense also to do it properly. Right. So, we sure can play the game, we just need to catch up a little bit.
Yeah, so the title of this section of the program, the last section of the program, is called "Nonsense as a Pandemic or an Epidemic itself," right? So Maarten, do you think we have the tools? Just so Massimo ended on an optimistic note. We have the same kind of tools to perhaps battle the bad influence of the social media with their algorithms. But Maarten, do you believe that that there is something to stop the pandemic of nonsense?
No, I'm afraid it would be easier to eradicate the coronavirus than eradicating nonsense. But even though I fully embrace this whole metaphor of an infodemic or an epidemic of nonsense, and actually I published a couple of papers. I think one of them was actually co-authored with Massimo, where we literally apply this idea of epidemiology of beliefs, of representations. It's an idea that we borrowed from Dan Sperber, the anthropologist. There's a lot of analogies that you can draw between the way a virus or a contagious disease spreads and the way in which beliefs, also true beliefs, by the way, I mean, true beliefs, spread also in a sort of epidemiological fashion.
If you can find the right meme.
If you can write the mean or the meme?
The meme. Yeah, the right. Dawkins meme.
But to give a simple example, let's say that if there's an earthquake tomorrow on the other side of the globe and a tsunami that kills hundreds of thousands of people, then the true belief that there has been an earthquake in Southeast Asia is going to spread like much faster than any sort of fake news. So also this brings me back to the point about the post-truth era, etc. I'm very suspicious of the idea that things are getting worse in general. I think this whole notion of the post-truth era is perhaps also like a very nice illustration of what it purports to demonstrate. It's just like a story that is repeated over and over again, which I think has little basis in reality. To the extent that you can measure it, if you look at history, ancient history even, people have always been superstitious. People have always believed in conspiracy theories. In the Middle Ages, they believed that the Jews poisoned the wells, and this was the cause of the Black Plague, etc. The Romans were extremely suspicious and paranoid. Well, I mean, there were a lot of real conspiracies, of course. It's just that the dynamic has changed. So, for example, I mean, also to give a simple example, someone, a simple housewife here in Flanders can just, with a few clicks of the mouse, can suddenly start believing that there is this worldwide conspiracy of pedophiles, and Donald Trump is our savior because he's battling from inside the the new world order or whatever it is. So this infamous QAnon conspiracy theory, that of course that wouldn't have happened decades ago. So everything spreads much faster, but also debunking information also spreads faster. There's a very interesting paper by Steve Clark, a fellow philosopher, who actually shows, and I think with good empirical arguments, that there's a difference between the kind of conspiracy theories in the 60s about JFK, for example, and the kind of conspiracy theories that we see today in the internet age about 9/11. And the difference that he sees is that, to even call a conspiracy theory about 9/11 a theory is to give it too much credit, because it's just an endless string of open questions that are perpetually under construction, but they don't have a theory. They're just asking questions. And one of his explanations is that it's exactly because of the internet that as soon as someone comes up with a hunch, with a one of these anomalies that doesn't have an explanation, I mean, and literally in a matter of minutes, you have the skeptics who jump on that and who are going to try to debunk it. And this is one of the reasons he thinks that conspiracy theories today don't even get an opportunity to develop in the way they could in the 60s and 70s, because they're immediately exposed to critical information. So this is a useful role that we can play as skeptics. So I think, of course, there is an epidemic. It's true, and we have to do as much as we can to fight it. We will never, conquer the epidemic in the sense. I mean, it's always going to exist, but we can keep it at a low. I think at a manageable level.
Which isn't obviously at the moment, but we shouldn't sulk. We should take action. That's what you're telling us.
Yes, but but we should realize that it's not something new. So the dynamic is new, as Massimo said. I mean, the social media is of course a completely novel phenomenon. But also, we shouldn't panic. It's not that the truth is a thing of the past, and now we live in an age where people can't tell truth from reality anymore. Even when you look at the virus, for example, I mean, you have these people who believe all sorts of crazy things. But on the other hand, I mean, also to end on an optimistic note, 80 or 90% of the people follow the experts, and they just believe, but first of all, that there is a virus, that it's dangerous, that face masks help against it, that there's all sorts of things that you have to do, or that you have to wash your hands. And this is also, I mean, there's a high level of trust that people have to put in experts, because they've never seen the virus. I mean, how do you know that washing your hands helps, or that wearing a face mask helps, or that maintaining a certain distance helps? It's so. You can look at it from two different perspectives. On the one hand, the majority of the people have embraced the scientific consensus about the virus, but then there's of course this strong and vocal, very vocal minority, the guys who published the Gezond Verstand, the Common Sense magazine, and some of them may be dangerous. A minority of that minority are the people who would threaten politicians, or who would destroy 5G installations, etc.
Maybe just one more question to you, Massimo, by way of closing this section, because we're already over time.
Well, I'm not too worried about it, but it shouldn't. We shouldn't. There's not room to talk for 10 or 50 more minutes, so we should come to a conclusion.
Yeah. So Maarten, thanks for that optimistic note. But my question to Massimo is, okay, so belief is just the flip side of the coin that also has on the other side the idea of action, right? So beliefs lead to action. Do you think that the optimism of Maarten will ring through next Tuesday?
Good one.
That is a really good question. I can tell you that my wife and I will actually be in Washington, D.C. During election day. For a completely unrelated issue, because I'm going to be recording a number of lectures for the Great Courses Company. And we will be bringing with us our European passports in case things go really down the drain very fast. However, that I think it's not likely. I do think I'm still slightly optimistic about the system, as flawed as it is, and the American people as flawed and divided as they are. to actually come true? Of course, this is an empirical question, and we're going to find an answer in a few days.
Yeah, I think I share your prudent optimism, or like I have to be. I was shown a lesson in humility 4 years ago because I was absolutely convinced, well, not absolutely, but that Hillary Clinton would win.
Yeah.
So now I'm kind of much more cautious. I think if you look at the polls, they are even more in favor of Biden than they were in favor of Clinton 4 years ago. But still, you never know. And because of the strange, electoral college system in the US, even if he wins, even if Biden wins the popular vote, Trump might still win.
Yeah.
So, but I think I would be willing to place a bet, not 99 against 1, but I think 80 against 20, that would be fine with me. So I'm reasonably confident that, yeah.
That's interesting. So we're playing a Bayesian game basically here.
Yeah,
right.
So
we have a 20% chance of losing here.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess by that, I often ask my students actually when we have conversations about controversial issues to give me their estimate. So if you had to bet up to $100, how much you bet on this outcome. So it looks like Maarten is slightly more optimistic than I am because I'm giving it about 60 to 65 at this point. But we'll see.
That's not a lot. Yeah.
But of course my point was that if people have certain beliefs, they will, these are voters and they vote in light of the beliefs that they have. If there is something like maybe not a pandemic or an epidemic of nonsense, but at least a kind of growing oil spot on the water of common sense, in what sense do you believe that we ever get a chance to kind of restrict or limit the nonsense in a democratic society like ours in such a way that we have more confidence that these people will also vote for the most common sense politician?
I don't have a lot of confidence. I mean, we tend to forget that both Hitler and Mussolini got elected. So people, I don't have a lot of confidence in people's ability to figure out what is best for in terms of their kind of government. On top of which, by the way, in the United States, there are additional issues. The Electoral College does skew things away from popular vote. It's an arcane system that it's really problematic. And on top of that, one of the two parties in the United States, which shall go unnamed, has engaged in widespread voter suppression for the last several weeks and has packed the Supreme Court precisely in advance of a possible controversial outcome of the election. So it isn't just the public, it's the system, it's the structure of the system that is problematic. And that is the thing that makes me less optimistic than Maarten, I suppose, because we don't have just the American public decision to deal with. We also have a flawed system at a structural level. Nevertheless, my answer usually when we get to this kind of pessimism is always to go back to Carl Sagan's famous The Demon Hunted World. The subtitle for that book was Science as a Candle in the Dark. And I generalize it as reason as a candle in the dark. I think that a far more realistic expectation and goal for us as in the skeptic community is not to convince everybody to eliminate the pandemic of nonsense. That's not going to happen. That is never going to happen. I agree with Maarten. Our job is to keep the light on, the light of reason on, that when people want to turn to reason again in large numbers, as they have done occasionally historically in the past, then there is a place where they go. It's a much smaller goal, but it's much more doable goal, and I think we should be more than happy if we just manage that.
Well, I'm quite
final
happy.
thoughts on that, Maarten?
I think I already mentioned that it's hard to compare different eras because now there's a personality cult around Trump that didn't exist, of course, 10 years ago or 20 years ago. But I am drawn back to the analogy with Nazi Germany. Of course, to some extent, the Nazis were elected. It's true. I mean, it's not true they never got a majority of the votes. But what I do think, I mean, you can one comparison that you can make is that there was this infamous, the most destructive conspiracy theory of all time, probably back then, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which was a very specific, elaborate conspiracy theory about this, this secret society of Jews that were, about to destroy European civilization, etc. I'm kind of hard pressed to find something that is as dangerous today. Even like Trump, of course. I mean, he's just spouting all sorts of nonsense, and he was the one who popularized the whole birther conspiracy theory. But even that, I mean, it's nothing compared to the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. I think even Trump wouldn't get away with something like that today. So perhaps I'm being a little too optimistic now. But I think the environment back then, also the kind of information environment for people living in Germany in the 30s, was different than our environment today. So even though I think Trump is he would be a good tyrant. Like if he would have been born in a different age, he would probably become a Mussolini or something like that. He has a lot of the personality features, but I do have a lot of.
Isn't a good tyrant an oxymoron?
Well, he would make for. Yeah, it's. I mean, in a way, he's also
Maarten.
He's stupid. So in that sense, he wouldn't make for a good tyrant. But he has a couple of the personality traits that you find in a lot of tyrants. But he works in a completely different system, and I do have a confidence in the robustness of the system. I think it would be terrible catastrophe if Trump would be re-elected. But even then, I don't think the system would collapse.
Okay, Maarten, hold on to that optimistic thought.
Exactly. We have to wrap it up.
We have to wrap it up now. Massimo has to go. You have to go. We all have to go now. It's a very interesting discussion. There are some closing remarks, of course, by Gert-Jan. But first of all, let us thank Massimo and Maarten for their very fruitful contributions to this part of the program. That was very nice to hear. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And it really didn't feel like an hour. It felt like 5 minutes. If it were up to me, we would continue this for hours.
I know if it were up to you, Gert-Jan, we would.
Yes, probably. But we have to wrap it up. So thank you guys very much. And hope to see you again very soon. And let's wait and see what happens on the 3rd of November. We hope for the best.
Fingers crossed. Yeah, even skeptics sometimes engage in a little superstitious ritual.
It doesn't help, but fingers crossed.
And knocking on wood. Yeah. Right. Thanks,
guys.
En daarmee komen we aan het einde van ons congres.